Executive powers. Powers of the President and the executive branch under the United States Constitution. The President of the United States is the agent of Congress. The President and his officers execute the decisions of Congress. They form the executive branch as they are the only branch with the ability to execute policy. Not only is the President empowered to enforce the authority of the legislature, but is duty-bound to do so. President Nixon learned this when he refused to implement the spending plans agreed by Congress. The President participates in the legislative process, but his veto can be overruled, and the President can be forced to implement laws that he vehemently opposed. Clinton's attempt at implementing a line-item veto was found unconstitutional, so the President's powers to challenge bills agreed by Congress is limited. The question arises as to whether the President can act independently of Congress. The answer is no, with an emergency exception. The President cannot force his own decrees unless there is an emergency, and even then he cannot act against the wishes of Congress. In an emergency where Congress is silent, it's necessary for the President to act, but it's never constitutional for the executive branch to violate congressional decisions. The President does have some exclusive powers. He has the power to pardon for crimes against the United States. Of course, he does not have the power to pardon for crimes punished by the states themselves. He also has the power to appoint and remove his own staff. Again, these are federal government officials, not those of the states. Congress has no powers to appoint or remove executive branch officials, issue or revoke pardons for federal crimes. Although Congress has no power to directly appoint or remove officials, it does, however, have some influence over the President's decisions. When appointing a principal officer, such as an ambassador, judge, or head of committee, the President is to request the advice and consent of Congress. When appointing a more junior or inferior officer, the Congress can delegate these advice and consent duties to the President, committees, heads of department, or administrative agencies. Congress can set boundaries over how the President appoints and removes officials. It's important to bear in mind that Congress cannot restrict the President from carrying out his executive duties, so congressional powers in the executive branch are somewhat capped by the Constitution. War powers are divided between Congress and the President in the Constitution. Congress has the power to declare war. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, makes battlefield decisions, and Congress does not have the power to decide how the war should proceed. But Congress does have the power to fund the war, through its taxing and spending power. In a surprise invasion of the United States, as Commander-in-Chief, the President has emergency power to repel invaders without congressional approval. Although the President is the voice of the nation when it comes to negotiating treaties and agreements, congressional approval is required before the President's talk becomes U.S. government policy. A treaty requires the approval of 2/3 of the Senate. An executive agreement, however, requires no explicit approval of Congress. Silence of Congress is sufficient for an executive agreement to become law. If Congress disapproves of the executive agreement, the President's decision is overruled. Lawsuits against the President are expected to impede his ability to act on behalf of the nation. So the President has an absolute immunity against civil suits for damages resulting from his presidential acts while the President is in office. He also holds a privilege against the release of confidential communications. But this is not an absolute immunity, only a presumption. When Nixon tried to have the Watergate tapes withheld on grounds of privilege, the Supreme Court held there were specific reasons why the tapes should be admitted as evidence, and the presumption of privilege was overcome in that case. Impeachment has at least two meanings in the law. Impeach means to challenge the honesty or veracity of a witness. It also means to charge a public official like the President with an offence or misdemeanor while in office. Through an impeachment process, Congress has the ability to remove the President from office. The process involves a vote in the House over articles of impeachment. If that vote is passed by a simple majority, a trial ensues and a vote requiring 2/3 of the Senate. Upon conviction of impeachment, the President is immediately removed from office.